So I'll start. So today, algorithmic architects are really excited to show all of you the game we've been building for the past week. Next slide, please. So each of us were assigned unique roles to spread out the work. So I did the GUI part. The alien movement and game functions were done by Taketoshi or Tak. The score calculations were done by Kami, player movement by Neha, and design by Michael. So before starting to build a game, we had to first decide which game we wanted to make. We had 5 options in mind: Castle Crashers, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Little Nightmares, and Limbo. So we decided to make a poll for to make sure that we're making a game that is in most people's interest. So if you look at this pie chart, Space Invaders clearly won by double the votes of the runners-up choice, while Pac-Man got 0 votes. Next slide. So now at this point, we had settled onto Space Invaders, but what exactly is Space Invaders? So Space Invaders is a classic arcade game. In the game, the user controls a spaceship and must defend against alien invaders before they reach the bottom of the screen. The game can also end if the player's spaceship is destroyed by the alien's bullets. However, every time the player destroys an alien, they earn a certain number of points corresponding to the type of alien they kill. So now that you know what game we're building and how the game works, now comes the part of building it. I will pass it on to Michael to tell you guys about that.
So to create this game, we used Python with the Pygame extension that was provided. Using Pygame, we may go through different components of the game, such as the start page, where the player goes, and how they'll actually play the game with the actual gameplay, and even the game over. Basically, what happens if they lose. Different key parts of the game itself were also coded, such as how the player will move and shoot the enemies, and how the enemies will advance towards and attack the player. We made a scoring system to keep track of how far the player advances and a restart function if the player wants to play again.
Now I'll explain the analysis of the visuals. So our overall theme for our game is that the game would run inside an arcade machine. And for creating this, we need to make a start menu, which consists of 2 elements. And the first image was generated by OpenAI. And the second image was a retro style TV outline. So it'd make it look like the image was inside of a arcade screen. So with these 2 elements combined, we were able to make a realistic arcade screen. And we also made 2 buttons for starting and ending the game, as well as a scorekeeper for the previous score. For the game screen, we were thinking of making a futuristic version of Space Invaders, but we decided to make a replica of the original game. For this, we filled the screen with a light black, and we used an image to make the glitchy effect. We also used the same TV effect to make the arcade screen. We kept a scorekeeper on the top left and a life counter, I guess, on the top right. And since there are 4 types of enemies in the game, we assigned each of them to their own sprite, and we made a sprite for the shooter. We tried keeping it as realistic as possible to the original version of Space Invaders. And while we were making the blockers, we were thinking of using a collision to make them only last for 1 shot. But then we decided to make them a pixelated map, so we could make them lose 1 pixel each time they're shot. We made individual Python files to import them as classes and to make them much easier to integrate into the main code. The next slide shows the 2 screens that we used. So the left would be the start menu, and the right would be the game menu. Yeah, that's basically it. So I'll now hand it to Kemi to explain the deployment process.
For the deployment process, the game was split into 4 different sections. which were the movement for the enemies, the players, and the bullets, the score calculation, the display screens, and lastly, the game over code. Some of the first things that were implemented were the game background, the score and live variables, and the frame rates. And this was to just set a basic skeleton for the rest of the game. And then in order after the development came the movement for the player, the score calculations, and then the game code, and then the bullet movement, and then lastly was the enemy movement. Throughout the making of the game, there were a lot of different methods that was used to like combat the bugs that we ran into and some of the problems. And there were times when we had to completely scrap the code and restart because some things just weren't working. But it came out well in the end. I'll now pass it to Neha.
In Pygame, we learned the syntax. We gained knowledge about how to create player movements, fire bullets, building maps, main menus, text, fonts, collision, and etc. We succeeded in creating a playable version of the Space Invaders game. We were successful in giving the players and the adversaries movements and actions. If we had more time, we would want to improve the game in a way that as the difficulty of the game rises, the game's pace also quickens and add more levels.
So I'll share my screen for demo. So this is our main screen. So once we start our game, this is the first thing that pops up. So there's a play button and a quit button. So it also shows the score from the last game. I'll just play the game right now. So you would move around using the arrow keys or WASD, and then you'd shoot the projectiles using the space bar. And as you can see, like even the players can shoot their own, yeah, well, they quit right there, but the shooters can shoot their own blockers to make a clear path. And yeah, I guess that's it. Oh, all, yeah.